probably don't need me to tell you, but back in the day, Nintendo and Rare went together like peanut butter and jelly. I'd throw some generic praise their way like they couldn't be beat, but that'd be an understatement. Together, they were an unstoppable force, hit after hit. NES, SNES, Game Boy, N64. They represented the best gaming had to offer, a duo so dynamic it seemed like the only thing that could possibly defeat Nintendo and Rare was Nintendo and Rare themselves. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what happened. After failing to properly secure Rare as a dedicated first-party developer, despite more than a decade of successful releases that were just as influential as any Mario or Zelda title, Nintendo lost their most powerful asset to the clutches of Microsoft. However, there was a silver lining amidst the seemingly bleak future of what was to come. While Rare was no longer permitted to develop games for non-Microsoft platforms as per the agreement between the two, they happened to make use of some incredible loopholes to say the least. See, while Microsoft wholly owned the studio, the contract between the two dictated that the only console titles Rare could develop for were Xbox systems. Though this may sound like the kiss of death, Microsoft had never entered the portable gaming market, meaning Rare was free to develop for Nintendo brand handhelds. If you ever thought it was weird that Rare licensed titles released on the GBA and DS while they also made games for the Xbox and Xbox 360, this is why. Naturally, they'd go on to release remakes of the SNES Donkey Kong Country trilogy and even oddities like Saberwolf, but they'd also take the opportunity to develop installments for series that had since laid dormant. 2003 would see the release of Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge, a sort of pseudo-prequel to Banjo-Tooie for the Game Boy Advance, with a mobile phone version handled by Infusio the following year. Yes, there exists a Banjo-Kazooie mobile game, and it is gloriously bizarre. Long before the days of Super Mario Run and Pocket Camp, there was Grunty's Revenge for Java Micro Edition. My god, if I'd have seen this as a kid, I would have gone apeshit, like Parrot with the Doom mobile games, and I guarantee you, I'd have gone starry-eyed with amazement. Forget Banjo 3, it's never gonna exist, alright? This is the game in the series that you've never played. As is, it's a heavily compromised port made to accommodate for significantly weaker hardware. I mean, I'm not over here trying to suck its dick or anything, but most people glance over the fact that the GBA was a beast in its own right. Sure, it had plenty of ugly, uninspired games, but what could you really expect when it was the only major portable console on the market during the early 2000s? I swear, anyone who tries to tell me the Gamecom was successful can get a kick to the nuts.
And it plays more games than you idiots have brain cells!
And sure, it might have been cool, but who honestly bought an N-Gage? Point is, the mobile game's more of its own thing, but we'll get to it later. For now, let's just focus on the GBA port. After this cute little cutscene where Banjo understandably flees at the sight of the THQ logo, the story is laid out. It's been 2 months since the finale of the first game, wherein our heroes defeat Gruntilda and save the day. The old witch herself is trapped under a boulder, so she hasn't been much of a threat. However, her loyal servant Klungo is hard at work freeing her, and since this is set between Banjo 1 and 2, which had been out for a few years at this point, rather than going where you'd expect it to, the story remains familiar yet original. We're introduced to a mechanical suit which Grunty's spirit uses to escape from her grave and begin exacting revenge. She's quick to nab Kazooie and travel years into the past, with Mumbo explaining to Banjo that he can save the day if he's quick to follow her. On the off chance you don't understand any of the plot here but love X-Men, it's Days of Future Past. Banjo's Wolverine. Kitty Pryde. Whatever. Since you start off without Kazooie, there are only so many things you can do. Banjo's moveset is limited to a singular dump. Singular dump? He takes a shit all over the fucking place, man. Banjo's moveset is limited to a singular jump, which does the bare minimum and doesn't cover much space, and his only means of attack is the returning pack-whack from Tooie. It's the traditional formula. You've got to pick up skills along the way so you can access newer parts of levels and be more efficient when taking down enemies. You go on to regain more of the original moves like rolling, egg shooting, and flap flipping only after rescuing Kazooie, of course, and by that point, the game truly shines as being a worthy translation of the 64 title's gameplay to isometric 3D. Yes, this is an isometric platformer not unlike the GBA Spyro games. However, whereas those games began low and grew to become great over time, Grunty's Revenge is quality right from the start. It makes plentiful use of the GBA's color palette, the character models look pretty damn good, and the gameplay, while a bit wonky at times, is faithful to the mainline games. Being Banjo-Kazooie, you wouldn't be incorrect in assuming the game's a collectathon. Musical notes, Jinjos, and Jiggies all return, giving you incentive to heavily explore the numerous areas. Mumbo Jumbo is of course present, and sticking with tradition will transform you into different things after being given a token. The transformations here are pretty neat. I mean, they don't do anything to break the mold, really only ever acting as a means of pulling off certain things regular Banjo otherwise couldn't, but they're fun nonetheless. In a sense, they're all reimaginings of pre-existing transformations from the past games. You've got the mouse, which can fit into tiny spaces, the octopus, which can swim in dangerous water, the candle that can illuminate dark areas as well as light stuff on fire, and finally the tank, which can open special doors and withstand acid. The crux of things is based around doing random tasks so you can collect enough Jiggies to unlock new levels. While a lot of them can be gained by defeating groups of enemies or finding enough scavenger hunt items, the game also takes a page, or pagey, ukulele pun, and incorporates various mini-games into the mix. These include slide challenges, fishing galleries, and capture the flag battles, though the three are retooled and given different aesthetics depending on the area they're played in. For example, one level might have you catching sheep, while another has you catching fish, so it's really more like 8 different mini-games overall. They're all pretty easy for the most part, no one is too difficult at any given time, but I will say that the timing for the fishing one can be pretty tricky. In fact, this is a relatively simple game. The majority of its challenge comes from the expected moments of poor judgment given the isometric perspective. However, it's never too much of a pressing issue. Even when you do die, it's no sweat, as the game doesn't burden itself with extra lives. You simply respawn and continue from there. There was one moment though, in the level Spiller's Harbor. It's here you finally get access to the jump pads, but in order to use them, you have to first activate switches, which then turns on the Wonder Wing button, so you have to break into a mad dash to get to it before the time runs out. After you've gained temporary invincibility, you have to kill all of the bees, which then allows you to hit another switch that turns on another jump pad back where the Wonder Wing was. So again, you Talon trot your ass back across the way, still under the pressure of a time limit, and hit the Jiggy button so you can finally complete the challenge. However, the Jiggy's back on top of the building where you started the process, and you only have 14 seconds to get over there. I don't know if I just suck, which, let's be honest, that's probably the case, but I had to do this whole thing like 10 times, and by the end of it, I was left exhausted. It feels like this was done just to be annoying. Not difficult, annoying. It's the type of artificial challenge that makes my head spin. Like, you can't tell me nobody at Rare or any playtesters brought this up as an issue. If the timer was extended by like 2 seconds during the final part, it'd have been a million times more bearable, and I wouldn't be here complaining about it. One thing I did find pretty laughable was the bosses. Don't get me wrong, there are some pretty cool ones like the Ghost Pirate, who I can't help but look at and think of Spinal from Killer Instinct, but the fights against Klungo and Gruntilda are nothing to write home about. It's the same thing every time. Avoid their attacks and hit them after their shields deplete. Whether Klungo turns invisible or Grunty shoots projectiles isn't that big of a challenge. It is pretty cool that the final one keeps with the quiz tradition though. Don't be sleeping on the music either. This game has some bangin' chiptune tracks, even with a catchy variation of the Spiral Mountain theme. Overall, it's just a really neat game. I honestly went in expecting the post-Nintendo Rare quality that we've all become accustomed to. Instead, I found a quality Banjo game. If you're a fan of the 64 titles or generally enjoy collectathons, I'd say it's a good time. It's not often that a portable title perfectly captures the essence of its mainline contemporaries while making sacrifices to run on inferior hardware, but Rare managed to pull it off in the best way possible. I know it isn't exactly a favorite among fans, but hey, you could do a lot worse. The mobile port, on the other hand, Well, let's just say it's a bit different. Instead of being worked on by Rare, it was instead developed by Infusio, a European mobile game company responsible for such hits as the Spyro Fairy dress-up adventure and even a few Asterix games. Grunty's Revenge Mobile is an enigma you don't see very often these days. If the GBA version is to be considered a downgrade of the main console titles, that'd make the mobile release a downgrade of a downgrade, and honestly, that isn't too far off. It has the same exact story and for the most part gameplay, but is horribly reduced to operate with the platform it's on. For starters, it runs at like 5 FPS. If you ever wanted to know what Banjo-Kazooie would play like on a graphing calculator, I think this is as close as we'll ever get. Picking up items causes the music to all but cut out, but hey, it isn't much to worry about since the so-called music is comprised of 10-second loops that play once and never again. In fact, it isn't just items. Any action tied to a sound effect causes it to stop, which is humorous to say the least. The progression works the same way with you collecting MacGuffins and gaining new moves, but absent entirely is Mumbo along with his transformations. Talk about making a Banjo game that doesn't even play how you'd expect. Levels themselves are also not as big as they were before. If I were to guess, I'd say only a quarter of their original size remains, and a staggering amount of Banjo and Kazooie's moves are just missing. No Talon Trot, no backflip, there aren't even special pads to make use of. There are only 3 bosses, each of which are Gruntilda, and they range from elementary to straight up annoying. This second one has these slime enemies you have to shake off, but for some reason the game has trouble detecting it, so 3 out of 5 times you'll be shaking like a madman, almost like Banjo's having a seizure, and end up dying anyway. You know, it's one thing to trim the fat and condense the experience to better fit a mobile game, but it's another to strip it entirely. Right from the intro, you can tell that something is fucked, because for whatever reason, Bozai pops out of the ground and says Mumbo's dialogue, only for Mumbo himself to appear afterwards. Because it's missing so much stuff, the game's actually classified under the adventure genre, making it the first Banjo game to not be a platformer. If you think it sounds bad now, well, buckle up, as it's also devoid of any minigames. They'd instead be released separately under the moniker of Grunty's Revenge Missions, and I gotta be honest, I'd be lying if I didn't say these are also inferior to their original versions. Though they might have higher quality sprites and music that doesn't end prematurely, the frame rate is enough to give anyone a headache. And seriously, what the hell is this that I'm looking at? Banjo traveling through a urethra? Can't say I expected it, but what else is new? I'm willing to bet there are fan-made Flash games better than this. Jesus, just stay away from the whole thing. It's god-awful. After all, I should know. I was crazy enough to 100% it. Fear not, however, as Rare would continue releasing stuff for the Game Boy Advance, and 2005 would usher along the next portable title, Banjo Pilot. Now, of course, you can't talk about Banjo Pilot without again bringing up Rare's seedy past. Like many of their games, this began development during their glory days and was actually conceptualized as a sequel to Diddy Kong Racing, only with a stricter focus on aerial vehicles as well as newly incorporated Mario characters. Then the Microsoft buyout happened, yada yada yada, and the team chose to finally retool and release the game with a new coat of paint. Being a racer, there isn't very much of a story. Rare never officially gave one, but that didn't stop fans from speculating. The most commonly accepted narrative is that Cheeto has lost all of his pages and the heroes have to retrieve them by winning races. Since Gruntilda isn't dead, it's also believed by many to be yet another prequel. Why's it gotta be a prequel? The lore of Banjo-Kazooie is not that deep. When you first start out, you only have a few racers to choose from. Naturally, being the type of game that this is, you unlock additional characters as you go. This is where Cheeto's pages come into play. See, completing a race nets you bonus points that can be used to buy stuff. Add to this musical notes hidden around tracks that net bonus pages, and you have plenty incentive to unlock new things. Some of the items are weird though. You can purchase new characters, but then there's these extra boosts you can buy for tracks. I don't know, it seems pointless. Like, if you're already kicking ass, what reason do you have to do so? Why fix what isn't broken? The control is awkward. I wouldn't call it bad per se, it's just that I always felt like I had to make minor corrections to my position on screen. Not only can you turn left and right, but you can also adjust your altitude up and down, leading to some interesting moments in avoiding hazards. B activates whatever power-up you have, R lets you make sharper turns, and L allows you to pull off tricks that sometimes give you an extra boost. I'm not exactly sure why there are all these invisible walls everywhere. Like, obviously there's gotta be some sort of penalty for going off of the track, but even then, it makes no sense for any of this to happen because you're flying planes. Give me something, anything game. Magic. Fucking magic. Gruntilda's magic prevents you from going off course. That's all you had to say. Hell, even flying over certain terrain causes you to lose speed, so I can safely say that I have no idea what they were on while making this game. In addition to the Grand Prix mode, there's also Jiggy mode. Think of this like Crash Team Racing CTR challenges. You have to collect all 6 scattered Jiggies and place first. Doing so unlocks Bottles, who by some miracle has the highest stats of all racers. There's also multiplayer races and battles courtesy of the GBA link cable. A proprietary so integral, you can't even play the modes without it. Come on, man, I'm trying to get footage for the 5 people watching this video. It's important to remember though, at the end of the day, this game really is just a hastily thrown together asset flip. For every Banjo-themed track, there's some leftover detail from Diddy Kong Pilot. You can spot Espresso in Jinxie's Dunes, along with Saberman in Jolly Roger's Lagoon, and call me crazy, but I'm pretty sure the invincibility theme is just Jungle Groove from Donkey Kong Country. Same goes for the Grassland music. This game may pretend to be in the Banjo series, but I think we can all agree its ensemble is just Donkey Kong characters wearing costumes. Even the race result music has monkey noises in the background. Could they really not have been bothered to just remove them? If you think that's bad, Gruntilda doesn't rhyme once. Really makes you wonder who was originally gonna be the big bad of this game. Maybe Whizpig, I don't know, K-Rool. All I know is something about Grunty speaking normally comes off wrong. I feel like I was never meant to see or play this. Honestly, it's far from the worst racer, let alone GBA game I've ever played, but it's too rough around the edges for its own good. Remember that post-Nintendo Rare quality I mentioned earlier? This is exactly what I meant. It's wild because most kart racers on the Game Boy Advance kicked untold amounts of ass. I played the shit out of Super Circuit as a kid, and even though I'm not a fan of its console versions, portable Crash Nitro Kart is a blast. Then again, watching the credits reveals all. These are unfamiliar names that weren't involved in past projects. As sad as it is, the Rare we knew was gone, replaced by an entirely new team of developers who had no idea how rough the road ahead would be. And believe me, it would be rough. So much so that the next time Banjo and Kazooie would pop up, they'd be in the company of lots and lots of cars. But that, my friends, is a story for another time.